Time for our next set of insights in the form of a panel discussion. And our topic for the panel discussion is absolutely awesome. It is awesome architects who are incidentally women. Okay, so I'm just going to definitely take the fact that we're going to talk about some of the fabulous women architects here. Moderating this wonderful discussion, we have with us someone who's an auto addict with no formal training in design, but she has a distinction of being the first interior designer to be conferred the Padma Shri in the year 1992, the first Indian designer architect to be invited to give an illustrated lecture at the prestigious National Building Museum in Washington, D.C. in 2003. And the first woman to be appointed in 2014 as a chairperson of the School of Planning and Architecture in Bhopal, a National Institute of Excellence. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together to welcome on stage. That's right, let's keep that applause going. Let's invite Ms. Sunita Kohli. A very warm welcome, ma'am. Ladies and gentlemen, on that note, let's get started and invite our next set of esteemed panel members. I'd like to invite Gayatri Shetty, Gayatri and Namit Architects, Bengaluru. Supraja Rao, Design House by Supraja Rao, Hyderabad. Vishakha Kavtekar, School of Planning and Architecture, Bhopal. Professor Mike Knowles, Director, Sushant School of Design, Delhi. Mr. Ketan Chavan, KCD, Mumbai, and Nadeep Mehta, Pearl Academy, Delhi. All right, ladies and gentlemen, firstly, can we have a round of applause as well? For a change, the distribution looks very different and good indeed. All the while, we had the gentlemen taking their seats, and now it's time for the ladies. It's wonderful indeed.
We're very happy to be here, but I see that the organizers have already distributed us. One side men, mainly, barring one, and one side women. So here, today, I think it's a very serious subject, the place that women architects have in India, in the India of today. And for that, I'd like to show a very brief, or give a very brief historical perspective. One, globally, and the second, what has happened in India. So globally, if I may start, that whenever one speaks of women architects or great architects in the world, the first name that comes to mind is Zaha Hadid, who unfortunately passed away just a few months ago. So this is Zaha Hadid, and she was the first person to win the Pritzker Architectural Prize, as all of you know, and also the first one to win a Royal Gold Medal as a woman. And she designed some exceptional buildings, which are famous, world famous today, and everybody knows them. This is what she did, which was mentioned by the earlier architect. This is what she did for the Olympics in London. And the fluid lines, which Zaha Hadid is known for, its distinctive structural underpinnings, again, which Zaha Hadid is known for. And then this is the Glasgow Museum of Transport. Again, it's a brilliantly designed building, which allows a lot of natural light to come in. And this was, again, another first. And then this is a smaller building, which is the Serpentine Gallery in the middle of Kensington Gardens. But again, the fluidity of her line, always with very strong structural underpinnings. This is a building that she's done for the FIFA World Cup in Qatar. And again, it is distinctive of the studio of Zaha Hadid. And the last building, this is something that she had designed in Baku, and it's a purpose-built building for cultural programs. So these, I just show very briefly these few buildings. And here I'd like to add that in the early 2000s, I happened to be in New York, and the Guggenheim Museum was doing a major retrospective of her work. So they had taken it from top to bottom. And what really struck me was there were amazing drawings, but most of the drawings were of unbuilt buildings. I mean, she was given a chance to build very late in life. And that is something that we can discuss why these things happen. But there is that sort of discrimination that society does, and which we will discuss, which are very eminent panel, and I'm very happy to add here before I introduce them a little later, that today's panel consists equally of men and women who are in the profession, as well as men and women who are academicians and are teaching, because I think both are very important for this profession to progress for both men and women. And I think that they will speak individually and give us their perspectives. The next architect that I'm going to show is a very young architect when she won the prize out of 27,000 entries, Maya Ling Yen, and I think most of you would have seen the memorial to Vietnam that is in Washington, D.C. And Maya is an educator, she's an artist, she is, of course, phenomenally well educated because she got both her degrees. And this is why I'm important, because education is the underpinning of good design. She got both her degrees from Yale, and she was the youngest person probably to be conferred an honorary doctorate from Yale University. And she has done, this is the memorial in Washington, D.C., and the next memorial is the one in Alabama, and which commemorated 41 people who were killed during the civil rights movement. Now we speak about, I'd like to draw a little attention historically to, not only has it happened in our country, which it has, but historically also, even abroad, there are women artists who should be part of the history of world architecture, but who have not been. And one example is Marion Mahoney, as she was called, more than Griffin. That's the man she married. She did a lot of work for Frank Lloyd Wright, but really, you do not come across her name when you have a history of Frank Lloyd Wright, or when you see an exhibition that is devoted to Frank Lloyd Wright. And this is one of the houses that she built, which was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, and you can see, and in these houses, much of the light fixtures, all the leaded glass, etc., was designed by her. Then another architect, Eileen Gray, she was one of the principal movers of the modern movement. And here you see this famous Bibendum chair, which is as fashionable today as when she had designed it. But people know the chair, but they seem to have forgotten that it was a woman actually who designed this iconic chair. Then there are other items of furniture. That little table has been copied and copied throughout the world, you know. But how many people know it was a woman architect cum designer, Eileen Gray, who was really responsible for this? This is one of the houses that she did. And now I come to Guy Olanti, and she was probably has been one of the most influential women architects, mid-century architects, because there was so much that she influenced in the Milan design scene. And she also was somebody that Mies van der Rohe and architects like him had worked very closely with. She was phenomenal, and she's very well known for her museum designs, which I show here, Museum d'Orsay. And the second one I show is the art gallery at the Pompidou Center. And the third one that I show is the Art Museum in San Francisco. So these are all what I'm showing are some are forgotten architects, like Elizabeth Scott, who died in 1972. And she was the first woman who was given to design a public commission, which was the Shakespeare Memorial Theatre. But she's all but forgotten in England. And I'm sure I can ask Mike to vouch for that nobody speaks of Elizabeth Scott today. When they speak about the history of 20th century architecture in Great Britain. Now, fortunately, closer home, this is Zena Fadiglio, and she's the first woman, apparently, who has designed a mosque in Istanbul. So here's a first. She's an interior designer, but she runs a firm of architecture and design. And I happened to have met her a couple of times when in Turkey. And so these are the women who are breaking new paths because they are being given new opportunities. Now, this we have, so this subject, when Shraddha first mentioned it to me, awesome architects who are incidentally women, let me tell you, half the men fell by the wayside. Because, you know, they were thinking, are we now going to be talking about women who consider themselves awesome? Not at all. We are going to be talking about the sort of issues that really should be addressed as far as the discipline of architecture is concerned. What will make them awesome? And I'm not going to, I have not mentioned awesome architects, one sitting right here in front of me, and the several modern architects who are familiar with, who most of you are familiar with. But here, before I introduce the panel, it is very important to remember that we also have a history of women architects in our own country who are all but forgotten. And we had women architects in Bombay, like Pireen Mistry, who was the first architectural graduate from the JJ school. Nobody remembers her. We had Urmila Chaudhary from Chandigarh, who spent years working with Corbusier. Nobody remembers her. We had Hema Sakhlia, who also worked as an urban planner with 2 male architects. But the men are remembered, somehow the women are not. So on that note, and actually there isn't even our histories of architecture do not include their names, which I think is something that we need to address, because here we have several eminent academicians. And I think these are histories that need to be taught. Then only will we bring them back into mainstream memory of architectural history. So what I would like to do is we are going to speak by alphabetical order. I don't know whether we are sitting in the same way, but I'm going to introduce Ketan Chavan, who is studied at the JJ School of Architecture, and he runs a small architectural, I think he's being modest, firm, and he also teaches design in the Rachna Sansat School of Interior Design. And I'll quickly say who all are there, and then there is Dr. Vishakha Kavetkar. At least just put your hand up, please, Vishakha. So she heads the conservation department, conservation architectural department at SPA Bhopal, and her doctoral research was on the relevance of ancient monuments and archaeological sites and remains Act of 1958. Why I'm spelling it out is because there's such few women who are in the field of conservation architecture. So she's one of them, and she will speak to you herself about this major project in Ashapuri, which they've taken on. She has taken on with her students. It's a 7th and 8th century site, with these 27 fallen temples and how they are documenting all of that. Then there is Professor Mike Knowles, and he heads the Department of Design at the Sushant School of Design and Architecture. And he firmly believes that change in society can only happen where there is design education. So he will speak to us more on that. And here I'd like to mention that his wife is an interior architect. His 2 daughters are studying architecture. I think they've graduated now, right? And so he's seen at very close quarters what design brings to the table. Then we have Nidip Mehta. Nidip, you have to put up your hand. Okay. So, and he thinks that there's a delicate line between having an opinion about gender bias and being patronizing. So he will speak more, and he again is in academics. He's lived and studied all his life in New York. And he says that he has a major interest in understanding how to adapt education, that is pedagogy, curricula, etc., to current generational thinking. So he will speak further on that. And Nidip heads the School of Design at Pearl Academy. And he's a full-time academic administrator. And I think his greatest claim to fame is that he had dinner with Mr. George Martin, who, as you all know, is the one who wrote Game of Thrones. So everybody watches that. And then we have Supriya Rao. And Supriya Rao is from Hyderabad. And she runs a very, very successful design firm. And she is the principal of this company that she has. And she has not only chaired national, international conferences, but she always calls herself a great go-getter with an unyielding attitude, whatever the hurdle may be. She is a hurdle crosser. So full marks to her, and she's worked globally. Then, last but certainly not the least, we have Gayatri Shetty. As I told you, we're going in alphabetical order. And Gayatri is an architect whose daughter is also an architect. And she works, she enjoys working with nature, which is with the built environment. And she likes to incorporate as much of this as possible into her projects. And she is trying to increasingly bring more and more professionalism into the field of interior design. So if I may, I'm asking each one to make their comments, because the time is short. They'll be speaking for 5 minutes. And then we would like to then ask, there'll be a question-answer session with the audience. So that is how we have jointly planned this session. Thank you. May I ask Ketan, please?
Good afternoon, everyone. Is my voice audible? Yes. Yeah. I guess by now you've realized that although the topic is awesome architects who are incidentally women, we are not going to present any eulogies to women architects. In fact, we are here as we have discussed initially and guided by Sunita to touch upon a topic which can, like Nidip suggested, a little difficult to address, especially for male architects, because you don't want to be sounding patronizing. But there are certain issues that are that need to be addressed here when it comes to, especially comes to education and then the career of women architects in India. I think we all agreed initially in our initial discussion that we are probably limited by the cultural assumptions about women's intellect and physical abilities when it comes to choice of an architect, or which should not really be the case, because when you are looking at the educational system really. I am a visiting faculty at Rachna Sansad School of Interior Design, where about 85% of the interior design students are women, are girls. And then if you see, only a fraction of those really go out and in the field of architecture are known or recognized. So these were many factors that we had to put across. What is the cause is what we like to discuss at this session. Is it is it discrimination at the school level? I would like to think that no, there is no discrimination as far as the teaching curriculum is concerned. It relates equally to the girl as well as the boy student. Does an employer or an architect who is employing, is that a starting point of any discrimination in terms of employing women architects versus employing male architects? So that has got several factors that are contributory. Like I said, there are certain cultural assumptions which may not be even part of the urban scenario, maybe, because we know that we are all at par, but might still be some of the experiences that the lady panelists here have on board that they will like to contribute to. I say that, okay, I have some research suggested that there would be an assumption that the woman would quit after marrying, something like that. Like I said, the cultural assumptions, which stops somebody from hiring a woman architect. Or what would happen after after that lady has a child? Would she continue to be in the profession, or would she give away for taking care of the home and the child? That's another concern that is being addressed. These are really the factors that we have to address here today, and I guess there is more to come in terms of the educational background as well as the I would say that I suggest discrepancies that are suggested right now. I think I have enough of.
I mean, we'll come back to you so
Sure.
that then other panelists can also address together. We'll come back to you so that together with you other panelists can address that even though we have a student body of over 60% in our architectural schools, but that is not represented in the workforce at all. So what happens to that interim period? So these are, I think, very important issues that we need to look at, we need to address. But now I'll ask Vishakha, because Vishakha is one of the few, she's a very small body, of course she's very highly qualified, who are conservation architects. I'd like her to speak on the discipline, on this particular discipline of architecture, what happens to women in it, and
If we look at the history of conservation in India, we'll find that it was predominantly dominated by archaeologists, because the conservation and movement in India stems from archaeology. And archaeologists usually look at heritage where it is very much important for them to preserve the past as it is. And they worked so much on the material evidences, and the evidence is what matters to them. But over the period of time and how globally the whole concept of heritage has been evolving, women in India are now pioneering this entire movement of conservation in India, where we are not trying to look at heritage as something which is to be kept as it is in the past, but we are accepting to the fact that change and development has to happen. And we are looking at ways and methods by which we can bring heritage into the future. The typical training of conservation goes where a lot of emphasis is given on studying the historical background and to do research. And I always felt research was a little glossy field where you have to just collect few books and you read it and you write it and then you become an intellectual. But over the period of time, I've realized with my experience that it is so much of hard work has to go into it, because research in India has really not kicked off. And this I can share with a lot of my experiences, which I had eventually done over past 14 years. And one flagship project that I always talk about is the Ashapuri Temple project. Most of the times we look at ancient text as foregone, or which is the past. But we seldom do realize that these texts needs to be looked at as principles of construction or something which is beyond mythology. And similarly, it had happened that we had this text of Samarangan Sutradhar, which was compiled in 13th century by Raja Bhoj. And it talks about a lot of things, including planning of cities and planning of temples or building of temples. And there are 85 chapters to it. My experience to it is only with the chapter number 65, which talks about Bhumij temples, which are temples centered in central India. And while doing this research as a part of fellowship that you get, I worked with Professor Adam Hardy to try and understand the principles. And we were fortunate enough to get a project called as Ashapuri Temple Project, which is funded by WMF. And we could manage to, and this site is full of 10,000 temple fragments. So if you look at the site, then it is only a sea of stones. But when we started reading these chapters and going back to the site, we were successful in stitching back 3 temples which were fallen down. And from there onwards, the perception of research has changed. It is so much of hard work where we have to pull in the theories back to the site. And here you are really a problem if you are a woman. Because all these sites are in such places where they are not even a facility which you can call it as a public facility. Research, you are always continuously exposed to interaction with a lot of government officials. And for most of the times in the society that we are, women do research for time pass. Arey ma'am, kya mil jayega? That's the starting point. And it has been a difficult journey, but I am very proud to say that we've managed to reach somewhere. And over a period of time, I have to now, when I teach conservation in the Department of Conservation of SPA Bhopal, I try not only developing or teaching theories of conservation, but you have to really train the students right from the thinking process, right from that the safety is a perception and not that you are actually unsafe in every place that you go, to the point where you have to tell them about management and multitasking. So training is becoming more and more about bringing in the right values of not fighting against the society in which we are, but facilitating the research that is more important than getting into the smaller fights. Thank you.
I'll ask Professor Mike Knowles now, and we'll come back to you, Vishakha, because I think you need to tell us, the percentages of men and girl students who are taking up this profession and what happens to them later. Mike, may I request you?
Thank you. When Sunita sent me this request to talk about this subject, inspiring, wonderful architects who are incidentally women, I was really quite taken aback. Because incidentally kind of meant second class. Absolute rubbish. I've known Sunita for a few years. I know her to be brilliant at what she does. She's no walkover. She runs a very strong, very powerful company. And I've known that for years. I first came to India 30 years ago, and the name that was about then, or should I say 20, was Sunita Kohli. So I was really quite shocked about this. And so when we set the Royal Society of Arts up here, some 10, 12 years ago, then Sunita was the first person I went to sort of do all that. I mean, the situation, I mean, what is it? If people talk about India as a developing nation, and that also annoys me because we're not a developing nation. We're a nation going through its renaissance, going back to the fantastic times that we've had in the past. And I come from a relatively young nation. Americans come from a very young nation. So you're going back, you know, whatever. And so being an old man now and spending half of my time here and half of my life in the UK, and being very blessed by having a wonderful Indian wife, you know, I get all sorts of sides of the thing. So this is just what it is, and things move on. I mean, as a furniture designer, I remember the first time that I saw Charles Eames, the ant chair. Loved it, beautiful, very uncomfortable. In those days, nobody mentioned the fact it was Charles Eames and Ray Eames. Ray Eames wasn't important. That's the way people did things back then. And then it changed, thank God, you know? And I mean, of course, Ray and Charles Eames being so associated with India, with the wonderful India report, which people need to start looking at again. It was 110 years ago that Emily Pankhurst, the suffragettes, was imprisoned, force-fed. I can't remember the name of the lady who, you know, who threw herself in front of a racehorse and died for the sake of the suffragettes. Things change. Things move on. Design education in India is taking over. It is. B schools are going like that, thank God. D schools all over the world are going like this. And the lovely nature of India as an amazingly entrepreneurial country means that you're following suit. It doesn't matter if you're a guy or a girl, it's what it is. And I suppose I'm really, really very lucky. I mean, okay, I live in a matriarchal society. I mean, I have a son who's just completed his MFA from Goldsmiths. He's wonderful, but he's quite gentle. But my wife is a strong and powerful designer, runs a great company. She's a Jain. She's a good bunya. If she wasn't a good bunya, I wouldn't have the privilege of being an impoverished university professor. My daughter, well, I have a daughter who's an architect. I have a daughter who's a furniture designer. I have a daughter who's now doing graphics and with journalism. And they're strong and they're powerful and they're meaningful. You know, and they grew up, but the younger ones grew up in India. If I look at my wife's practice, it's totally girls working extremely hard. And, you know, it's quite interesting. When you get old, you kind of get a little bit mellow. And then before, when I think, well, I should be doing as part of this, why can't you ask me something? They don't need me. They don't need me. Their power is just amazing. At the university, phenomenal. When I was asked, I came from practice. So when I was asked to set up the Sushant School of Design, as a sister school to the Sushant School of Art and Architecture some 6 years ago, people said to me, oh my God, it's going to be a disaster. You'll never find faculty. How can you build a design school in India? But fortunately, I've found fabulous faculty. And I'm not being patronizing when I say the beginnings of that school were all strong girls that I worked with. Brilliant, amazing, amazing people, both in practice and both in management and getting it all together. So I've had a great time in that. Yeah, we've come across stupid things. I remember one vice chancellor who's no longer with us saying, what are we doing this design thing for? Girls want a degree in design because they want to create frocks and they want a good degree to get married. What a load of junk. But that was a long time ago. And I guarantee you now, you come to Sushant School of Design and you feel the powerhouse. 70% girls, 30% guys. And watch the girls when they really take off, especially when they go into their first internship. They're out in the world, they're leading the guys, they're bringing them on. Just very quick, I know I need to push it. But now parents are coming and pushing their kids, their daughters, into D schools because they know there's a future for them. And so the future of design, and architecture probably, is very much going to be lady-led. And just one, but very, very, very briefly, we've heard the word or the expression design thinking a few times over the course of this event. It's almost becoming cliched now, design thinking. But don't forget that the first power point of design thinking is an empathetic understanding of a problem. You listen. Now, I can say it from experience. Ladies listen an awful lot more than guys do, and their empathy levels are much stronger. And so the potential of great design thinkers rests with the girls, guys, not with us.
Thank you, Mike. Nidhip, may I ask you, you're another educator.
Thank you. Hello? Can you hear? Thank you, Sunita, and thank you very much for having me on this panel. Also, it's sometimes a little bit, you have to wonder whether you're the token male, to give their male opinion or not. But I think I'll assume that I'm here to give an opinion. I just want to maybe start with relating an anecdote about something that happened when I, joined Pearl Academy and I started teaching. And most of my life, I spent most of my life, my education and my career in the USA. So coming here to teach in India has been a huge learning experience for me. But one of the very key things that I remember, a couple of years ago when we were preparing for our admissions, and when we as department heads have to speak with our teams to prepare them for what should we be doing in our interviews, what kind of students we should be looking out for. So I remember one of my colleagues, I won't say who, but she kind of came up and said, listen, we want, our college has also 75, 85% girls. We'd like to get more boys, in order to get a better balance and get more diversity. And she was instructing them that, if there are boys who come for interviews, even if they're not so good, let them come in. Because we want more boys in our college. So I really scratched my head about at that, and when it was my turn to come up here to address my team, I said, no, I don't. I disagree with that. I don't believe in that. I mean, as Sunita was saying, the industry doesn't reflect that percentage. So why would we not want to flood the market, so to speak, with more capable, meritorious, and talented women, designers? Why would we not want to do that? So if my entire, incoming batch was 99% girls and one boy, I'd be fine with it. I'm sorry, I'd be fine with it because we need that. We need that balance. So I think that's something that we need to keep in mind as educators. Of course, there's a need for diversity. There's a need for balance, but let's try to achieve balance in the larger context in the industry. And look, this happens everywhere around the world. I mean, it's not like, I come from the U.S., which is a relatively progressive country, you can say, but the same problem is there. In my batch in architecture, I think there were 100 or 115 of us, and maybe 10 girls. It wasn't that great to go to college with only 10 girls, because as a guy, you always want to have a better ratio. So, but I think it's something that's very important. It's something I've been very keenly aware of as I go through and educate. I think there are some issues that we deal with as educators in India. I mean, there's certain ways that I counsel students. I mean, there's certain things that I counsel students about, which are very particularly related to the fact that women, what role women occupy in society. I mean, some of my colleagues here will talk about how that is impacted in the workplace, but in education, I very honestly say that a lot of the counseling I do with some of our students, a lot of the counseling that I do that's with our students, is the fact that they may have joined our course, whether it's interior design or product design or whatever it may be. They've joined our course with the thought that, maybe not really knowing what design is all about. Their parents, they were very lucky to have parents who allowed them to do something, a non-traditional career. And then they've come into the course and they realize that, wow, this is what design is. I really want to make a career out of this. I don't want to get married right away. I don't want to, start a family one way. Why do boys, why are they allowed to graduate, build up their career, get a chance to establish themselves before they can start thinking about getting married? And why am I in my second year or third year of college already being pressured by my parents? It's not happening as much these days as it probably used to, but it is happening. I mean, I especially teach, our primary campus is in Delhi, and in Delhi, where you have a lot of conservative families, that is what's happening. So I think one of the things I also probably want to, maybe put upon the audience and the general public, I should say, as a challenge, or maybe even as a critique, that I am mostly in charge of design, a school of design, and we don't have architecture per se at our college, and I'm actually okay with that, because I realize that actually the design industry, if you look at it separately from architecture, is moving, I think, better, is moving faster in that realm. Graphic designers, interaction designers, communication designers, product designers have, I think, all but let go of those shackles, that somehow keeps the architecture industry, the architectural profession. The architectural profession is something that moves fairly slowly, in my opinion, because of that vaunted status as a noble profession, and we are regulated by the government and so on and so forth. We have licenses. So therefore, we appreciate the status quo of architecture. But I think it's time for us, myself, because I'm an architect as well, and all of you who are sitting here who are architects, to kind of understand this, and let's move forward. I mean, I still see mostly men in the audience. In an architecture, in an architecture conference, especially in a city which is as progressive as Bombay. So I think we have a long way to go, and I think, listen, I'm with you. We're all with you on that, and I look forward to being part of, this emerging conversation.
Thank you. That was an interesting comment that you made at the end about the audience. We thought we divided ourselves equally on the panel, but maybe you're right. There are more men in the audience than there are women. May I ask you now, Supraja, to give us your thinking on this particular subject of women architects and the role that they play in India, and what should their role be and where we should be going. Then we can discuss it further.
Thank you, Sunita. Thank you, FOAID. So I'll split this into two parts, really. One is the competence of women. So I think women are as intelligent, as dedicated, if not more, as determined, very focused, bring in a certain more sensibilities, whether it's architecture or design, to men. So I'm not even going there about women's intellectual capacity. Yes, there's another side of it where there are enough women getting an opportunity, which is probably in smaller places where the right to education and higher studies is. The second part is having, if 75% of your architecture design students are women, and so did Ketan say, then what happens to all of them? I'm sure a decade or two later, at this rate, the market will be flooded by architects and interior designers who are women, clearly. But yeah, for now. So what happens, and I think my biggest challenge has been, I've just completed 25 years of my own practice this March, and it's never been, I've never even taken my gender to work, and I don't even remember that I'm a woman, and hence I need to even think twice with this. I'm an interior designer, and I'm dedicated to my work, and that's it, period, I'm going to deliver. I think raising the child has been my toughest question, and how to balance. And I remember about 17, 18 years back when Sunita was invited to Hyderabad for a talk, and I got some one-on-one time, my only questions to her is, which should have been professional, how do you go from here? How do you do this project overseas? No. I only asked her, how do you manage your house and children? And I always, in a lighter note, say that I would have probably done a little more work or been probably less guilt-feel if I had a wife at home, which I don't have. So I think that's when men get lucky, is they can go back to, you know. So I really think the challenge for women to excel at work, whether it's a job or your own practice, is balancing home and office. So whether it's east or west, women still has to be on top of things at home. And again, I remember, you know, so if you've seen this very famous interview of Indra Nooyi, and she says, women can't have it all, you know, and balancing work and home is always. So when my daughter was really young, I had a very clear instruction to my secretary that whatever presentation I am, no matter what, who's in the office, if I'm in a conference room, think of a presentation. If my child calls, that call has to come to me and I'm going to pick the phone. And I'm not apologetic about it. I tell my clients, I'm going to take this call, it's my daughter. I'm not going to tell a lie. Because my client can wait those 3 minutes, 5 minutes. But if my 3-year-old, 5-year-old had to tell me that what a blast she had at school, or she had this creative idea, she has to say it only then. She's not going to tell me an hour later. So that was still a single digit. So when it is double digit, then I explained to her. So I really think the challenge for women, and the only way, is a good support system. And I'd heard somewhere that for a woman to be successful, it takes another 5 women to support her. So whether it's your mum, whether it's your cook, whether it's your mother-in-law, whether it's your, you know, you need a support system to develop. And to be even to sit here today and leave home and work of course all of us, but home and child is only possible because of support system.
Thank you. May I request you now, please, to speak?
Yeah, being the last one to talk, where everyone else has said most of what one is thinking, I want to add that, you know, I have been in practice now for almost 28 years, and typical Indian traditional, coming from a traditional family, got married early, in fact, even had a child early, but decided and was supported, like Supriya said, that, you know, I had family, so went ahead with practice. Went ahead, worked with a firm, and then started practice with a partner, Namit. What we saw then was, you know, really this tussle about family, child rearing, and how to balance that with projects. But at no time, I think at no time did you ever take, you know, a stand that it's going to be, you know, I mean, you need to kind of make excuses for yourself. You always went ahead as an equal professional. We, you know, whether it was contractors or whether it was clients, I think there was no way we were looked at differently. And I think that's the world today. I think today, you are not, you know, I mean, this is what I have experienced, that you're not looked at as a woman architect or a male architect. I think you're looked at as an architect and your capability or your sensibility, and, you know, is that what they want in their project. Having said that, there have been, you know, issues in the sense that, you know, we do have young architects joining the firm, and ever so much you see that, you know, the younger girls or the, you know, the young mothers are the ones who are really full of, you know, a little bit of guilt. I think it's maternal instinct. Things, you know, may be going their way, but there is a lot of pressure. I remember, you know, that especially, you know, till recently, there's always this counseling that's going on. And it's design on one side, but there's a lot of counseling when it comes to, you know, the women in the firm. And I think it's important because, you know, India right now is in transition with the present generation really moving forward. My daughter has just finished her architecture, and, you know, I don't think she feels the way we do. You know, I think our generation, you know, thinks differently. Today's generation doesn't even think about, you know, whether they're, you know, female or male. They just go ahead and do what they're doing and believe that they're doing the right thing. So I think it's transition. I don't think we have too many issues. Yes, there are some areas where things are a little slow, probably, you know, especially on the rural, you know, side of things. But in the cities, I believe that, you know, we're already at the other extreme, where, you know, within a couple of years, we'll have so many women in practice. Thank you.
All I would like to say is that personally, there may be people who may agree with me, may not agree with me. I think we have made huge steps in the 21st century. But the underlying factor is that we are a very discriminatory society as far as professionals are concerned in the field of architecture. And now, of course, that I think that exists, that is being addressed. We cannot certainly address what happens in urban India and what happens, I'm not even saying rural India, but in second-tier cities or third-tier cities, because the problems there are different. But it needs a much larger colloquium to be addressing issues of that nature. Why the women panelists here are there? Because I personally think they're all awesome with what they have done. And they are talking about 28 years. Well, I think I'm probably the oldest in this hall because 2000 and next year, I would have completed 45 years in my practice. So now I've also, of course, I'm very happy to be called aged or whatever it is. And, but I remember in the mid-70s being sent by Mr. Oberoi because I had been commissioned to do a hotel in Egypt. So I have always worn a sari. I thought I must tell you this. But before I tell you this, I think there's a small thing I need to, I worked a lot, as some of you know, I worked a lot on the restoration of the buildings that have been designed by Sir Edwin Lutyens. And having said that, there is, I mean, I hugely admire him as an architect because he was extremely creative, and I don't think New Delhi, as the 36 square meters, what we call New Delhi, would be New Delhi, had it not been for the genius of that one man. And because he not only did Rashtrapati Bhavan, but he also laid out the city of New Delhi. And he made it into a garden city, and so that's another thing. But while speaking, I remember on Lutyens at, I mean, I've spoken about him in many places, particularly in the US. I remember finding out that once in 1932, he had been asked to give an address at the Royal Institute of British Architects. And there he was asked a question, so what do you think of the role of women architects? And prompt came his reply, it depends upon which architect they are married to. Now, so that is Sir Edwin Lutyens, brilliant as he was. Any case, I have to say, I'm not married to an architect, though my husband has been supportive. And in the mid-70s, when I first went to Egypt, so when I arrived at this meeting, we were doing this, this hotel on the Mediterranean. When I first arrived, of course, the room was only full of men. It was like a small conference hall in the Mina House, Oberoi in Cairo. The men died of shock because they saw a woman in a sari. Then I had long hair, and I was the designer for this multi-million-dollar project. But that shortly then changed into, you know, because we all are professional in our approach, and then I'm happy to say after that one went on to 60 other visits to Egypt and 14 years of working there. So things were good. But that doesn't mean one did not realize also the discrimination that could exist, particularly today. I think we are short of, do we have time for at least 2 questions from the audience? Yeah? Okay. So would somebody like to ask a question of any one of the panelists? Yeah. Could the gentleman there have a mic?
Good afternoon. And just before the session started, my first realization was, yeah, I've always had a lot of good friends who are architects and designers, but the deep realization was, out of the 40 years of my practice, the last 30 where I ran my own office, we'd always had more than 50% of our people and professional people who were from the fairer sex, okay? But what I didn't realize, I just realized and remembered that the first 9 years of my life, I worked for a woman, and it was a 2-person office, she and me. So that I'm saying this was the starting point, and I owe a lot to that whole experience. But the question I'd like to ask Sunita is this. I don't mean to be gender biased or anything. Is there anything you think in this equal gender world that a man as an architect can do better than a woman as an architect?
No, I don't think so. I actually, on a more serious note, all I think is that once women, because women are also becoming patrons of architecture. So there's that happening. And once women become policy makers and more women, that is where the change will occur. So thank you very much. And thank you for being an indulgent audience and an attentive one. Thank you. And I thank my co-panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, ma'am. I'd like to thank all the panel members. Firstly, I'd like to request you all to come together for a group photograph. I'd like to now invite on stage Mr. Alex Sofalvi from C Group Company to please come forward to present the memento to our speakers as well. I request Mr. Alex to firstly present the memento to our session moderator, Ms. Sunita Kohli. To Ms. Gayatri Shetty. To Mr. Nidip Mehta. Thank you very much, Mr. Alex. I'd like to thank Mr. Sofalvi as well. Thank you very much for doing the honors. I'd like to now invite Mr. Abhijit Bora from Everest Industries to please come on stage and present the mementos to our next set of panel members as well. To Ms. Vishakha Kavtekar. To Mr. Ketan Chavan. To Ms. Supraja Rao. And to Professor Mike Knowles. Thank you once again to our fantastic set of panel members. Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you once again, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, huge round of applause one more time.